Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. Well, we're just a couple of weeks away from the end of the Obama administration and the beginning of the Trump era. We were all expecting, I think, to be talking about the incoming President Clinton and her promise to carry on the legacy of President Obama. And that would have given us weeks to look at the Obama legacy and talk about what Hillary might do. Of course, that isn't what happened. And there's been so much news about the incoming Trump presidency that we haven't spent much time at all reviewing the Obama legacy. But certainly one of the major pieces of the Obama legacy is Trump himself. And as we've been saying on the Real News Network, it's the policies of President Obama, certainly Bush and also Clinton before him, that had helped set the table for the emergence of a Trump and the right-wing, what people are calling populism, and the resurgence of that. But now we're going to take a beginning of a look, at least at the Obama administration over the next week or two. And most importantly, the issue of the financial meltdown, 07-08, and how President Obama handled that. And within the context of that, the whole emergence over the last few decades of the power of finance. And the more parasitical finance seems to get, the more casino gambling it seems to get, the more powerful it seems to get politically. And President Obama is certainly part of that process, and Trump a continuation thereof. Now joining us from Iowa City to discuss all this is Paul Street. Paul's a journalist and author living in Iowa City. As I said, his most recent book is They Rule, the 1% versus Democracy. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here. So,
the one major, I would say, claim, a positive claim about the President Obama administration, and certainly not only, I have in front of me in my research here 50 things that some people think were positive about the Obama administration. We're not going to work our way through that. But usually number one or number two on that list is how President Obama handled the financial meltdown. And the phrase that's usually used is that under his watch, the crisis known as the Great Recession did not become the Great Depression. And he gets credit for that. So what do you make of that claim?
We've had sort of a very long, slow, weak, sort of pathetic recovery. It just came out recently, a high-level Princeton study that 94% of the jobs created under Obama have been part-time, contract, temporary, so-called gig jobs. There have been millions of jobs created. They've been incredibly bad, poorly paid, no benefit jobs. We know that 95% of the new income nationally in Obama's first term, I haven't seen the studies for the second term, went to the top 1%. We reached a point by the time of the eve of the last presidential election where Bernie Sanders could accurately point out that the top 10th of the top 1% has as much net worth as nearly the bottom 90% of the entire U.S. population. 68 people globally have as much wealth as the bottom half of the human population. Obviously, that's international. I've seen on more than one occasion and verified that the heirs of the Walmart fortune together, 6 or 7 people, have as much wealth, net worth between them as the bottom 42%. So it's kind of like an ongoing slow depression, recession for most of the population anyway. Black net worth in this country now in the median household is at 1/13 of white median household. Well, so it feels like a recession. It feels like a depression for many people. Anyway, yes, the system did not completely and thoroughly collapse. Yes, if a Republican had come in 09, there might have been an even weaker stimulus. There might have been no regulation whatsoever of Wall Street. Maybe there would have been a collapse. Many analysts say right now we've been kicking the can down the road and are just looking at new asset bubbles and potential collapses. I'm not a financial analyst primarily or by any claim to have any claim to expertise in that, but I see that again and again. And that's a sort of recurrent historical outcome of these absurd and obscene levels of over-concentration wealth in a few hands without productive outlets for investment, that they tend to feed that sort of thing. And any number of experts are predicting another crisis, a financial crisis at some point under Trump. So we shall see.
When you talk to ordinary people, and this is certainly the narrative of the Democratic Party leadership as well, is that essentially President Obama was a progressive. That word got thrown around a lot during the recent Democratic Party primary. But Obama is a progressive at heart, constrained by a Republican Congress. What do you make of that argument?
Well, you know, the key moment, Obama came in, as Lyndon Baines Johnson did in his first term, with Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress. He was not constrained by an powerful right-wing opposition his first 2 years, and could very likely have pursued far more actually progressive and aggressive, left-leaning, liberal, genuinely liberal progressive policies, and chose absolutely not to, even with that electoral mandate coming in 08. And Obama really did have a kind of electoral mandate for some sense of progressive change in 08. Absolutely kicked single-payer health insurance, which had majority citizen support, to the curb. Couldn't even invite noted single-payer advocates like John Conyers to his first summits on healthcare reform. Even a limited marginal public option, which was sort of thrown around as a political football for a while to sort of pretend that the Obama administration pretended to be for it, was pretty much kicked to the curb and kicked to the curb from the inside. Obama campaigned on something called card check authorization of the Employee Free Choice Act, which would essentially have re-legalized union organizing.
Yeah, that was his big promise to the trade unions.
In this country. John Edwards campaigned large in Iowa. I saw it in person on free choice in a very aggressive kind of way, and sort of made Obama pick it up, and it was completely kicked to the curb from the beginning. There would have been significant popular support for strict regulation, even possibly nationalization of the very financial institutions that had led the economy over the cliff in incredibly reckless and dangerous kinds of ways. And in fact, Obama ended up having a meeting in March of 2009 where he called in the top 13 financial executives of the United States, right from Blankfein and Jamie Dimon and the rest all the way down. And they all came in terrified, and as one of them reported, we would have been ready to roll over and do anything that the president had demanded of us. And it turned out, he said, I'm here to help you. You guys have a public relations problem. We don't want to see you nationalized or taken over or broken up. Let's see how we can work together.
In your recent article, I think you quote Ron Susskind's book where he says Obama apparently said to the bankers, "I'm between you and the pitchforks, the unruly mob that might come and get you."
And I'm here to help. And one of the bankers left and said, "We were all so relieved that he wanted to help us." This is the quote: "He wanted to help us quell the mob." And of course, what follows in the wake of that is the continuation, indeed the expansion into the many trillions of dollars of the federal bailout of the very parasites who had driven the economy into the ground, right? And and as William Greider, the great liberal journalist, wrote in the Washington Post not long after that, Obama continued the great blunt lesson about power, right, for the American people. The government has plenty of money to spend when the right people want it, and very little to spend for everyone else. Right, and the great joke around the country became, "Where's my bailout?"
Let me make a kind of counter argument, which I expect if you were to talk to President Obama or some of the people close to him might make. Given the balance of forces, political forces in the country, including very conservative elements in the Democratic Party, even though he controlled both houses a large number of the Democratic Party itself would not support a single-payer health care system. Given the balance of forces in terms of how powerful finance capital is and what they can do in terms of rallying the media and rallying electoral forces, which they did in 2010, the subsequent congressional elections, that the demand of Obama to be a Roosevelt with the kind of New Deal, with direct jobs program, really take on Wall Street and finance capital in terms of regulation, Glass-Steagall that was done during Roosevelt, or the legislation with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, where they regulated position limits in commodities trading and so on and so on. That wasn't there to be had when Obama was president. That there was no mass movement at the level that there was in the 1930s. And given the control of mass media by finance, that Obama really couldn't do more than he did. And so by at least managing the global capitalist crisis in a way that it didn't become the Great Depression, he did as much as could be done given the circumstances. I'm trying to become an Obama defender here. What do you make of the argument?
Well, that may be the case. And there's all kinds of evidence for it. And I remember in '09, Obama's former colleague in the U.S. Senate from Illinois, Richard Durbin, throwing up his hands and saying basically that the bankers own they own the whole government. They own the whole place. They own Congress. I remember Sanders during the last presidential campaign, the primaries, pointing out that the federal government doesn't regulate the bankers. Congress doesn't regulate the bankers. The bankers regulate Congress in numerous kinds of ways, including the offer of job opportunities for people who do a couple of years in the federal government and then they can go out and make 8 times more money than they could ever make in so-called public service while they're in Congress or in the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they behave accordingly during that time in the office. So there's all kinds of evidence for that, with campaign contributions, control over the media, and career opportunities outside of public service, in Wall Street, in lobbying. All of that's true, but we don't know until a president actually comes in committed to being a progressive and finds out and tries and attempts to build an active citizens network and uses the presidency as a bully pulpit and tries to actually govern in accord with progressive campaign promises, as I suspect Bernie Sanders, for example, would have tried to do if he got in. It's kind of an existential argument. Right? The real proof is in the pudding would be if Obama actually tried. And there were all kinds of indications from people who had paid attention to the Barack Obama, not the Barack Obama who spoke to labor audiences or spoke to sort of campus town anti-war progressives, but the candidate Obama, who wined and dined really from 2002 and 2003 on and up through his presidential candidacy with the movers and the shakers, the power brokers, the lobbyists, who spoke to the Business Roundtable, who gave the keynote address at the neoliberal Hamilton Project, set up by Robert Rubin at the Brookings Institution in '06. The Obama who spoke to the Council on Foreign Relations and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. If you paid attention to the speeches Obama gave to concentrated wealth and power, you would have known in advance that there was never the slightest chance of him ever making that existential decision to try and see, to find out, to try and rally the populace and use the presidency as a bully pulpit to do, sort of Rooseveltian kinds of things. I mean, forget, Franklin Roosevelt. I mean, even Teddy Rooseveltian times. He wasn't going to do that. And a lot of us this is another topic, I guess, but a lot of us who studied Obama and knew Obama from early on, I did in Chicago, where I was based in the early, late 20th century and early 21st century, knew that was never going to happen. So we really don't know. He never tried. He never was going.
Yeah, we were reporting the same thing during
Sure.
the primaries on the Real News Network. If you actually read his speeches and looked at the actual content and not the brilliant delivery and the wonderful smile and the charm and the wit and so on, you actually just read the substance, you could see there's no reason to expect anything other than what we got.
And you talk to Chicago area and Illinois-based lefties, this really goes way back. And I will never forget that the great left political scientist Adolph Reed described Obama in the Village Voice in, get this, January of 1996, right after Obama had just been elected to the Illinois Senate. And Reed, who I believe was at Northwestern at the time and knew Obama, described him, without naming him, immediately as a vacuous to repressive neoliberal who sort of, coming up out of the liberal foundation world, who sort of epitomizes the convergence of middle class, sort of pseudo-progressive cultural reform and identity politics. And so,
yeah, I think the real critique, even if you give him the narrow limits of what's possible in today's politics and getting elected, getting nominated, getting elected, within very narrow confines, that he didn't push the limits of those very narrow confines at all. And maybe the issue that's most representative of that is that issue of public option in the healthcare reform. Yes, he didn't give any voice at all to single payer, Medicare for all type model. When he allowed Senator Baucus to chair the Senate committee that held the hearings, and they wouldn't allow one person to come forward and advocate a single payer. But the public option at least did get on the table. But Obama never actually seemed to support it, but this bully pulpit, like if he had called on 1 million people to come to D.C. and fight for the public option and all this, but he didn't want to let the genie of that mass movement out of the bottle. Quite the contrary. Once that mass movement for Obama was elected him, he wanted it to go away as fast as possible.
I just think that's absolutely right. And I think that the Ron Suskind account, based on inside recollections from bankers who were at this remarkable meeting of March in 2009, really sort of summarizes the basic worldview. And it shouldn't have been surprising.
Well, he raised more money on Wall Street than anyone else did.
He set new records. Right. I thought, after I read The Audacity of Hope, which is this sort of fake progressive and sort of deeply reactionary Ronald Reagan praising and 1960s disrespecting campaign book that Obama came out with in late '06, it's full of all kinds of paeans and statements of fealty to sort of free market neoliberal American style top down capitalism, and same with numerous addresses that he gave as a U.S. senator. So very little surprise there, frankly.
And the thing is, just to sort of come to a conclusion here, because we could talk about this for a long time, and we'll do it again. But the thing is, he knows better. I was watching, same with Bill Clinton. I saw a very interesting interview I don't think most Americans have seen. Bill Clinton, when Chavez went to the UN and talked about, I smell sulfur in the air, about had George Bush having just spoken there. And of course, he got a lot of negative critique for saying something like that in the United States. But Bill Clinton was interviewed on Canadian television, CBC at the time. And he was asked what he thought of the Chavez speech. And Bill says, it wasn't very good because it inflamed American public opinion on a kind of, nationalist, patriotic basis. If he wanted to make a critique, says Bill, he could have critiqued U.S. economic policy in Latin America. And Bill Clinton went on to give one of the best critiques of neoliberal economics as applied to Latin America that I've ever heard. Now, we know Bill was responsible for a great deal of this, but his argument against it was extremely well worked out, very fact-based, the way Bill Clinton's very good at making arguments. Then I saw a recent interview with Barack Obama where he talks very lucidly about how every modern economy has socialist elements to it, and it's a mixed economy, and to use this kind of anti-socialist rhetoric is silly because everyone knows there's these seasons. Like, he understands the issues. But
unlike Ronald Reagan and unlike George W. Bush, who were just sort of half moronic figureheads for real power brokers behind the scenes. Both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, highly educated, Ivy League law school, sophisticated, conscious articulators of neoliberal and imperial ideology, know exactly what they're doing and what they were about. And I sort of know this from inside information from Obama in Chicago, long before he became the national Obama phenomena. He's sort of quite astute about these kinds of things. He knows a thing or two about class analysis, knows a thing or two about Marxism, knows what neoliberalism is. And, in this wonderful book that just came out by Mike Lofgren, The Deep State, right? Lofgren's this sort of inside Washington character. He was a congressional Republican staffer for 3 decades. And he describes Obama, I think accurately, as kind of a reluctant, at the end of the day, sort of, but self-conscious and ultimately committed articulator of the imperial system. In sort of a diffident kind of way that ended up pissing off some elites. But he knew what he was about. It's very different than Bush, and very different than Reagan. And I think the same applies to Bill Clinton. They know they've been managing state capitalism, and they've been fairly good at it. I think this will be a difference with Trump as well.
Self-conscious and aware, but perhaps never expected that Trump would be his real legacy. We're going to talk more about that in a future interview. Thanks very much for joining us, Paul.
You bet. It's great.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.